Okay, welcome to the deep dive. You sent over some really interesting sources this time. Really got me thinking about how we talk about, well, complex stuff in our jobs.
Yeah, they're fascinating, aren't they? They really dig into how the language we use, these constructs and simplifications actually shape how we understand things.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, this is really relevant. Whether you're prepping for a meeting or maybe trying to get a handle on a new area or you're just curious, understanding this can make a difference.
Hmm.
Think of this deep dive as, a way to get informed quickly but properly, avoiding that feeling of just drowning in information.
Hmm.
We're focusing right in on these constructs and simplifications from the material you shared.
Right. So constructs, as the source puts it,
Yeah.
they're kind of like mental analogies, yeah? Bridges between things we can actually see and touch and ideas that are more abstract.
Like calling some groundbreaking work the spearhead of a field.
Exactly that. It's not literally a spear, obviously, but you instantly get it. It's sharp, it's leading, it's breaking new ground. It's a useful shortcut.
Okay. And then simplifications. How do they fit in?
Simplifications are a bit different. That's when we take something complex, maybe something we can perceive physically, and describe it using an easier physical comparison.
Like the galaxy example, saying it looks like a spiral.
Precisely. It cuts through all the, astrophysics and gives a quick, understandable image. Very efficient.
So our mission today, then, is to really unpack how these tools work. They help us, no doubt. Efficiency, understanding.
Definitely. But, and this is crucial, the sources also warn about the downsides, these oversimplification traps.
Traps.
Yeah, like when we start treating these abstract ideas, morale, culture, whatever, as if they were concrete things we could just, manage directly, that's where it gets dicey.
Right, the double-edged sword idea. The source definitely acknowledges the value, saves time, makes communication smoother in a professional setting.
For sure. That spearhead example, again, it conveys impact and importance so much faster than a long explanation would.
Yeah, you'd lose people.
Totally.
And the galaxy is a spiral. I mean, who has time to explain the actual structure in a normal conversation?
Yeah,
It works. It gives a shared image.
it does. But here's where we need to be careful. The source talks about physically unperceivable constructs, PHUN constructs for short.
H-U-N.
Yeah, a bit of an acronym, but useful. These are the abstract concepts we deal with all the time. Culture, risk, communication, morale.
The intangibles.
Exactly. And the potential pitfall is when we start thinking of these as physical objects we can just handle, manipulate, control directly.
As if you could just, I don't know, pick up morale and weigh it.
Right. The source gives a great example. The statement, mathematics has helped to describe the world. Sounds fine, right?
Seems reasonable, yeah.
But the source pushes back. It argues, well, mathematics itself doesn't do anything. It's an abstract system.
It's the mathematician.
Precisely. It's the people who create and use these investigative and calculative constructs, as the source calls them. Those tools allow us to describe the physical world in a commonly accepted way.
That's a subtle but really important shift in perspective. Focus on the tool makers and the tools, not just the abstract concept.
Mm-hmm. And another one is imaginary numbers in circuit theory. They're totally abstract PHUN constructs.
Right, not real numbers in that sense.
But they're used to describe something very physically real, PHPE, physically perceivable, which is power transmission. So the map isn't the territory, The abstract helps us understand the physical, but they aren't the same.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the source also mentions something about venerating science being a trap. How so?
Well, the risk is when we kind of put science on a pedestal as the only way to find truth. It can narrow our view quite a bit.
So it becomes like the ultimate authority, no questions asked.
Sort of, yeah. And the metaphors we use science as a light in the darkness or a bridge, they can build up this idealized image, which is great in some ways, but it can also make us forget that science has its own limits, its own assumptions, its own constructs. It's a human process, too.
And we might start dismissing other ways of knowing, like intuition, maybe.
Exactly, or practical experience, even. The source makes a strong point that not every professional decision can be purely science-based. Sometimes you have to weigh other factors, other realities. An obsession with only scientific proof can make us miss things.
Yeah, that fits with needing multiple viewpoints.
Yep.
Relying too heavily on just one, even a powerful one like science, means you might be blind to other valid insights.
Right. Now, shifting gears a little, the source talks about these modern replacements for, old gods or demons. Ways we explain things we don't fully understand.
Modern-day demons. In the office. What are we talking about?
Well, think about the common professional jargon. those abstract labels. Immature culture, poor communication, ineffective leadership, low morale.
Okay, yeah, hear those all the time.
These aren't things you can physically point at, right? They're interpretations, summaries.
Inferred constructs.
Exactly. PHUN constructs again. And the danger, the source warns, is when they become easy answers. Quick judgments.
So instead of digging into why communication is poor,
Poor communication just becomes the explanation itself. End of story. It shuts down the deeper look.
so they become scapegoats. Convenient labels that stop us from actually figuring out the root causes.
That's the argument. These labels can become like modern myths, simplifying things so much that they actually prevent real learning and improvement. We stop at the abstract noun.
Okay, let's get specific. The source mentions time management as one of these traps. What's wrong with that term? It seems pretty standard.
Well, technically, the source argues it's inaccurate because time, it just passes, right? We can't actually manage it like we manage, say, resources or projects or even our own energy.
Okay. So what do we manage?
We manage our activities within time, what we choose to do, how we schedule things. The focus should be on the actions, not the abstract concept of time itself.
So instead of time management, it's more like activity planning within a time frame.
Yeah.
Bit clunky, but more precise.
Exactly. It shifts the focus to what's actually controllable. The source even mentions chronophobia, fear of time, as another way this construct that's misused, making time itself the enemy rather than focusing on our actions.
Interesting. And what about the health example? Controlling weight.
Similar idea. The common phrase is helping people control their weight. But again, weight is an outcome, a complex one.
You don't just decide your weight.
Right. What people can directly influence or control to a degree is what they eat, how much they move, their diet and activity.
So the simplification controlling weight misses the actual levers people can pull. The source would rephrase it to be about informing people about healthy eating and activity levels.
Focusing on the inputs and the energy balance. It also warns about just fixating on the scale, that number, potentially at the expense of overall health and well-being, making an ideal weight the only goal.
And this applies professionally too, right? With things like safety, quality, risk, those abstract concepts we try to measure.
Absolutely. The source flags this obsession with dashboards, numbers, metrics for these PHUN constructs. And using metaphors like performance-like, safety doesn't perform.
People perform, systems perform, or fail to.
Exactly. And that leads to things like that chilling example of workers hiding incidents just to keep the safety stats looking good.
Yeah, that really hits home. The metric becomes the goal, not the actual underlying thing it's supposed to represent.
And it gets worse. The source points out this untold chaos because different companies, different researchers, they all define and measure things like quality or risk differently.
So we think we're talking about the same thing, but the underlying definitions and measurements could be completely different.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Which brings us neatly to the idea of the relativeness of constructs.
Okay. What does that mean exactly?
It means, essentially, that you can't prove any human-made construct is absolutely universally true or false.
Even with science, you mentioned validation earlier.
Right, but the validation process itself relies on comparing one construct against others. It's always constructs all the way down, in a sense. Think about math again.
Okay.
It's this amazing system we built, incredibly useful for describing the physical world, but it doesn't create the world. It's a human invention, a powerful construct.
And even something basic like 1 + 1 = 2.
The source points out that's based on convention, on agreement. We agree to overlook the tiny differences between those two apples, for instance, and count them as equivalent units. It's a practical simplification.
And time pops up again here too.
Yeah. We use it to organize everything, but we don't fully understand it. And it easily becomes this rigid thing we measure performance against. Even though its definition relies on observing other regular events, it's relative.
So when we judge something like new technology, saying it's good or bad,
that judgment is based entirely on our criteria, our values, which are themselves constructs. There's no external absolute yardstick.
So the big takeaway is all professional judgments boil down to comparing constructs.
That's the core idea. Our professional truth is built on these accepted constructs. We operate within them.
And when they stop working, when our understanding fails?
We tweak them, change them, maybe throw them out and adopt new ones. It's a constant process.
It's all relative. Like the source says, no absolute high or low. It is about higher and lower than something.
Exactly. Things gain meaning through comparison within that constructed context, like teacher-student, employer-employee. Those roles only make sense relative to each other within a system we've built.
Now, the source gets into controversial relativeness. Using an airplane crash as an example, how can something like that be seen as relative? It seems objectively terrible.
Well, the argument is that our perception of it being terrible is also based on constructs. We value biological existence that's a construct. We compare the age of the victims to a constructed idea of life expectancy.
And ideas like self-determination, wanting control over life and death.
That plays into it too. The source even challenges the label non-existence for death. Why not see it simply as a transformation of physical material? The label we choose shapes our view.
That's provocative.
It is. And think about memorials, remembrance. Don't those suggest a kind of continued existence, at least in memory, which is another construct?
Huh. Never thought of it quite like that.
And it gets even more controversial. The source mentions potential economic benefits for some sectors after a disaster, or the way communities sometimes pull together more strongly after adversity.
So even something seemingly purely negative can have different facets depending on which constructs you prioritize or which perspective you take.
That's the argument. It really underscores how our judgments are tied to the frameworks we use.
Which leads, I guess, to the final point.
Yeah.
We can't escape constructs.
Pretty much. The source says absolute proof is impossible because our tools for proving are, well, also constructs.
But we still need to agree on them to function, right?
Right.
Agreement is still worthwhile.
Oh, absolutely. That's key. The source calls devising and mixing constructs our beauty, power, and curse. It's how we build everything, make sense of things, collaborate.
But it also causes conflict when our constructs clash.
Exactly. Accepting that truth is somewhat subjective, or at least construct-based, is fundamental to being human, to society. This diversity of stories, of truths, it's vital.
If we had absolute certainty, what would be the point of discussion or collaboration?
Right. Professional disagreement, seen this way, isn't necessarily bad. It can be a sign we recognize our understanding isn't perfect, that our constructs have limits.
It's why we have professional bodies, journals,
Yeah.
places to hash out these different understandings.
So the ongoing challenge isn't finding the single true construct. It's figuring out when to adapt or discard the ones we have, and how to compare them, which ones are more useful, more trustworthy, better suited for a purpose.
Good versus bad, reliable versus doubtful. Still comparisons.
Always comparisons between constructs.
Okay, so wrapping this up for our listeners, the main thing is constructs, simplifications, they're as essential tools. Powerful. But we need to stay critical. Remember they're subjective. Remember the risks of oversimplifying.
Yeah. Hopefully understanding this framing helps you look at information, conversations, meetings with a more discerning eye, seeing the constructs at play.
Definitely. So here's something to chew on after this. Given that our professional judgments are based on comparing these constructs, what are some of the unspoken ones, the assumptions just kind of floating around in your field or shaping the problems you're facing right now?
And maybe ask, if the truth we work with is construct-based, what happens if we intentionally try to reframe some of those constructs? Could that open up new ways of thinking, new solutions?
Lots to think about there. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We really encourage you to notice the constructs you use and encounter every day. Hopefully this gives you a stronger footing for navigating all the information out there.